Welcome to the very first week of our applied leadership course, Leading Remotely. I'm really excited about this course because I get to share with you some personal tips as well, not just tips that have come from my clients, because I have a team and I've never met them in person. They've always all been remote. And there's some really great tactics that we've used that have helped us come together as our own little culture, even though I don't even know how tall they are. So I'm also going to share with you some real complaints and some solutions that my clients have brought to me about moving to a remote work environment that I'm hoping will help you as well. So let's dig in. So, like all of our Apply Leadership courses, today is all about having a fresh start and approaching leading remotely with a more balanced viewpoint. Because obviously, if you're here, you want to improve it, and there may be some issues that you have with the remote work environment, or leading a remote team, or trying to keep a healthy culture remotely. And we're going to address all of that today. Next week's about gathering information, then we'll test and commit. And again, this follows the A plus method. So really we're at the very first step, which is becoming accepting of what's happening and then being aware of how you're showing up within that new acceptance, within that new field of view, where you're looking at things more balanced than you may have in the past. So, this is the moment, again, where we're going to pause, where I'd love you to open up your calendar and schedule time for 30 minutes per week for the next 3 weeks. Each of these videos are typically not longer than 15 minutes, and that gives you a good 15 minutes for the journal questions. If you're a big journaler and you like to get really deep and write paragraphs of information, that's awesome. Then you might want to set 45 minutes. But for the most part, set up 30 minutes per week for the next 3 weeks and pause the video now. Please do it so that you'll be able to come back. And really, 5 to 10 days should be enough. If you know you're going on vacation, then skip that week. But here's an opportunity for you to set it up. If I haven't convinced you to set it up by now, hopefully this will do it. All right. Hope you paused the video and did it. If not, it's on you. Okay. But learning objectives today is all about coming to a deeper understanding of the issue at hand, identifying where you're feeling really frustrated, what's really difficult for you to accept about leading remotely, what's out of your hands, and what acceptance of that of the situation would look like for you. So this quote is great because it gets us started off with that more balanced approach, right? Which is, he says, one of the secret benefits of using remote workers is that the work itself becomes a yardstick to judge someone's performance, which is really cool. It's not so much about even how they're doing the work as the work that gets done and the completion of the task, which is a really great way, because when we are in an office environment together, it's so easy for us to, like, you know micromanage and judge each person's how. And with a remote work environment, they, as long as they get it done and they get it done well, it becomes more objective. There's less room for us to judge each other based on how it's getting done or how messy their desk is. But coaching or working remotely, it just changes everything. Connection, transparency, clarity, they all do become more difficult when a team moves remote. You can't just like pop over to someone's desk for a second or catch them on the way to the break room. You have to be much more intentional about the way that you approach them, and intentionality is going to be a theme we're going to talk about a lot over the next 4 weeks. So, we want to take on a more balanced view, though, because it does bring relationship challenges, but it can also teach your team new skills to grow and become closer than you've ever been before, because of that intentionality piece. Because, you can't just pop over to somebody's desk. You have to probably set up a time to schedule a phone call or a Zoom, and you're going to see a little bit more into their private lives, like this lady's dog right here. I'm sure a lot of you have seen like cats tipping things over in the middle of meetings. But let's talk about the common complaints that I'm hearing about in coaching sessions that my clients are bringing to me when they talk about leading remotely. um, a lot of them have said, it's just so hard to connect. They're just feeling disconnected. And like I was saying earlier, they used to see colleagues in the break room or the bathroom and they chat, but there's no more like, hey, how's your weekend for 2 seconds? And someone's like, good. And a lot of clients are saying they took for granted that small talk that used to kind of be annoying. Now they're like, I wish I could have it back because it connected people, even if it was a small way. There's also a lot of obscurity and just guessing. Like, I don't really know how they're spending their time, which, like we talked about earlier, in some ways is a good thing. But it's difficult to know for sure if they're working hard. Are they putting in the hours? They say they are, but how do you know? um and there's a lot of guesswork in terms of how a person is feeling. We used to be able to read body language, and most human beings are pretty adept at reading kind of the energy in the room based on how somebody walks in the door. But you can't do that, and that's why a lot of people are saying that after every meeting there's still so much confusion, because we're not used to having to be as so explicit in our language as we communicate with each other. So much of how we communicated prior to a remote work environment was picked up in subtleties of body language. You could tell right away if somebody wasn't quite on board, where now that person would have to say, hey, I'm not on board, or can you clarify here, as opposed to being able to intuit it. And that's been a pretty common complaint. But let's look at it in perspective and see some of the benefits of working remotely. you know, One thing I'm also hearing is that people are becoming really autonomous. They're working more independently than ever, and they can structure a day that's best for them, which allows them to flow and work even harder. And this one is really cool, where leaders are saying, my team, they're solving problems alone, right? Because they can't just like walk down to your office and ask you to put out a fire for them. They have to schedule a Zoom meeting, write a detailed email, schedule more Zoom meetings, so many Zoom meetings. So they're kind of just figuring it out on their own, which is pretty cool. There's also, it's kind of forced us to be more trusting. A lot of leaders have had to stop micromanaging, because you can't really micromanage the how when you don't know how they're working in the first place. And so trust has had a chance to increase in a remote work environment, or at least it has that potential, which I think is really important to acknowledge. And even though it feels less transparent, there's also room for us to be more transparent. Like, it's forced us to be more transparent verbally. You get what I'm saying? So you may not be able to see exactly what's happening, but if we want to be heard, if we want to be seen, we have to speak up and say it, or we have to reach out and ask. So that improves our conversational skills. That improves our ability to be much clearer and more candid and direct with each other, where we may not have had to do that in the past. And so let's look at the big picture. So although, remote work has possibly made your team more disconnected, goals are a little more obscure, meetings are obscure, there's kind of a covert nature to things because you aren't really sure how people are spending their time all the time, and a lot of guesswork and confusion. There's also some autonomy. You're seeing more independent problem solving, less micromanaging, more trust, because you kind of have to trust that they're getting the work done, and you'll find out at the end, right? And more transparency, specifically of communication, which is kind of nice to zoom out and see that big picture. So now let's talk about how you can evaluate, a more balanced approach, a more balanced view, I should say, for you. How can you start looking at remote work, and see the positives? So that's the first question for this week's coaching toolkit. How can you tell yourself a more balanced story about working remotely? Maybe there are a lot of things about it that you don't like, but let's take a moment to acknowledge how it's improved your team and helped you grow, and maybe even helped you be a better leader. And, but yet there are still drawbacks, right? If you accepted them, accepted the drawbacks of working remotely, how would you show up differently? You just said, this is how it is. Now what? How would you show up differently? And what would you want to adjust about your own perspective right away? Like, what would you want to change right away? How would you want to try to view things differently as you approach this fresh start over the course of the next week? All right, next one. Which positive attributes of working remotely would you like to cultivate in your team? In other words, if there are certain positive attributes that I mentioned that I'm seeing in other companies with other leaders and other teams that you're not seeing on yours, that's a really great starting point. You're like, oh, I didn't realize that we had that kind of potential with working remotely. So ask yourself, which positive attributes do you want to try to grow with your team? And then, how might you inadvertently be fostering the drawback aspects of working remotely? So, if there's some confusion or obscurity, how are you as a leader feeding into that? We all do it. We are imperfect people. I definitely do that with my remote team, where sometimes I'm like, yeah, I know I was not clear. I was not clear in my own head, and or something's not written out or drawn out the way I may have in person, and so I have to acknowledge where I am playing into the guesswork and the confusion. And then ask yourself, how would you like to feel while working remotely, within the confines of what's possible, right? So if you accept what's not possible and all right, that's not going to happen, then what? Then how would you like to feel? It's important to ask yourself that question so you can start feeling a little bit more hopeful about working remotely. All right, so we've come to a deeper understanding of the issue at hand. How can you come to a full, deeper understanding of the issue at hand? That's worded a little weird. I acknowledge that. See, I have room for improvement. That was unclear. How can you come to a fuller, deeper understanding of the issue at hand? And where are you feeling frustrated, right? Where are you feeling frustrated with working remotely, with having a remote team? Maybe it's even like one or two particular team members that you're struggling with. Identify that. And then say, what can you control? What can you control and what is out of your hands? What do you just have to say? All right, I'm just going to have to accept that this is how it is. Maybe this is their work style, and I'm going to have to roll with it and do what I can to get my needs met. But evaluating that is important. And then what would you like acceptance to look like? So if we haven't already addressed that in this module, in the next lesson, you'll have an opportunity to do that through the journal questions. All right, so this week, ask yourself, what does a fresh start look like to you? And how can you embody a fresh start over the course of the next week? How can you let it go, all that frustration? How can you let go? I've used this analogy so many times with that whitewater rafting bank. How can you let go of the vice grip you have on the roller coaster and just, and enjoy the ride, and see how it helps you show up differently over the course of the next week and frees you a little bit from the resistance you are feeling. Don't forget to visit our LinkedIn group, Hodges Leadership Institute. It's what you have to search for if you're not already in it. Share your insights and action steps. It's so helpful for us to learn from each other. And so next week, we're going to be gathering information, our typical next step in these applied leadership courses, where, hopefully throughout this week, you continue to foster a more balanced viewpoint and let go of some of the frustration you're feeling. And the week after that, we're going to say, okay, then how are you showing up? What's really at hand here, and how can we make it better? So, to sum things up today, leading remotely is an opportunity to learn new skills that can actually strengthen your team and bring everyone together and quite frankly, help promote even more authenticity, which is pretty cool. All right, hope you're feeling more hopeful with this fresh start, and I'll see you in a week.